Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for your patience. My internet was being a little bit slow this morning. So Leslie did a brief introduction, I'm sure, but my name's Leanne Lee, and I am High Quality Instructional Materials Communications Lead. I've been at TEA since 2014, so for 7 years I've been in the Instructional Materials and Implementation Division. And most of that time I've spent in distribution and accessibility. So I may have had contact with you before talking about EMAT or your instructional materials allotment, but I've moved into working with high quality instructional materials. And of course that overlaps with the TClass grant. So assisting with that, and like Leslie said, she's going to be on the call as well. She's the director of high quality instructional materials adoption strategy, and I work in that unit with her. Her last name is Hesketh, and you may know her by Leslie Patton, but she will be monitoring the Q&A, so please use that as we go along. And I also want to say that we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. This today is really a very high level overview. We're super excited to get started with this work and just to start talking to you and begin that communication about 2C. And today what we're going to be talking about is going over decision to see those assurances and a little bit about the coach's role. Also some training and requirements and filling your coach positions. What are some allowable uses of 2C funds? And then what are your next steps and some resources? And like I said, there'll be plenty of time at the end for some questions. So, and then I also wanted to say, Leslie, if you hear me that say something you need to add detail about, please feel free to interrupt. So I wanted to share what some of the districts that are in the CRIMSI pilots had to say. That we've gotten some great survey feedback and some emails, and this particular quote is from an email from a small rural district that's just talking about how those lessons are, really rich and cross-curricular. The practice is embedded, and also embedded assessments. They've been getting great compliments from parents, families, and the children are excited about it. And even some of the teachers that were maybe a little bit skeptical at first have come around and really raving about the lessons and about those embedded supports. So definitely it's having an impact. High quality instructional materials are having an impact. So we want to go into TClass 2C and reiterate some of the assurances and talk about the coach's role. And as you probably know, Decision 2 is one of the more complicated ones of the TClass grant. Decision 2A had two pathways or two options. So some districts received an in-kind award, meaning they're going to be participating in the CRIMSI pilot program. Some districts received grant funds, and they'll use those funds to contract directly with a vendor or vendors on the state approved vendor list. And that's for implementation and also professional learning support. Decision 2B also had those two different pathways where districts did receive in-kind or grant funds. In-kind meaning that they would order their materials directly through TNA and TEA, we would place those orders for them. If you definitely should have ordered materials for the upcoming school year by now. I know that was mid-February was the deadline. So if you have any questions, I know Colin Dipsey and Megan Rios are the ones to contact. So the easiest way to get in touch with them is through the help desk. And what we're going to be talking about today, of course, is 2C, and that is math and reading instructional coaches support. And coaches that are in CRIMSI, in the CRIMSI pilots, are going to be following all of those requirements and receiving supports through CRIMSI. And coaches that are not in the CRIMSI pilot are going to follow very similar requirements. And we're going to be releasing the details about that a little bit later on. So we're not going to get into the weeds of those requirements today. Just know that they're very similar to the CRMC requirements, and they will receive their implementation and professional learning support from their state approved vendors. And then they'll also receive support from TEA. And it helps me to see a graphic. So just to reiterate that, all of the coaches that are receiving TCLAS Decision 2C support are either CRMC coaches, meaning all of the training and support comes through the CRMC pilot program, or the other path is they're on their state approved vendor list. Coaches is what we're calling the other type of coach, and they're receiving their support through TEA. And this is just to recap those assurances from when LEAs agreed to the TClass grant. So specific to 2C, they agreed to identify and hire math and literacy coaches to support those high quality instructional materials, and specifically math and Amplify Texas literacy grades K through 5. And also they agreed to provide TEA with a list of all coaches that are going to participate in the 2C program. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because we have decided to have coaches self-register. And just to take the burden off of some districts who may have a spreadsheet of multiple coaches, and it would be a burden on one person to maybe submit that information, it would be easier for each individual coach, since we're asking for a little bit of detail from each person. So each coach will go ahead and self-register, and that is either pathway. So CRMC coaches or state approved vendor list coaches. They're also required, the coaches are required to complete professional development requirements to receive continued funding for school year 22-23 and 23-24. And of course, the primary responsibility of a coach is to provide that job embedded coaching and feedback supports to teachers that they're covering. And here's a little bit more detail about what constitutes the role of an instructional coach. And just like I just reiterated, provided that job embedded coaching and feedback support is their main role, of course. Also supporting teachers in PLCs, developing product expertise, really internalizing those HQIM products that they're supporting. They would assist with leveraging change management at the district, also facilitating best practices, progress monitoring, and that is in the areas of frequency of use, quality of use, and impact on student learning. And then, of course, they're going to submit all of the required feedback, surveys, data, and then attend all of the trainings that are required as part of the grant. So let's talk a little bit more about the training requirements. Separated out again by CRMC coaches and SAVL coaches. So the training requirements, they're going to follow a scope and sequence that is soon to be released. And this is on the CRMC side. That's very close to being, I think, finalized and released to those CRMC pilot districts. Because it's not yet, we're not able to share a lot of detail. So that's very soon forthcoming. And then we would be able to share a little bit more detail with all districts, whether they're in the CRMC pilot program or not. But we just have to be cognizant of that since nothing has been shared out as far as number of hours or anything like that. But there's going to be a set scope and sequence for those CRMC coaches for school year 22-23. Training will start this summer, I believe July, and run through the school year. And it would consist of onboarding training, synchronous and asynchronous sessions. And then, of course, those CRMC coaches will need to meet all the CRMC requirements like we talked about. For the state approved vendor list, the difference is that scope and sequence is going to very closely mirror the CRMSI scope and sequence of training. And it would also follow the same timeline. So this summer, running through school year 22-23. The main difference is there's going to be a waiver option. So following the scope and sequence, if an LEA that is using the state approved vendor list vendors notices that there's a lot of overlap, we want to be aware of that and not have overtraining. So if you notice you're already getting some of the training that's on the scope and sequence from your state approved vendor, then you have a waiver option. So you're going to work with those vendors and really compare the scope and sequence to the training you're getting from them. The waiver option, if you choose to do that, you'd probably be submitting the contract. So really highlighting where the overlap is in training, and some like an assurance document, most likely, where you like really highlight where the overlap is. And then it would be, TEA would make that determination if the waiver is approved. Do you have anything to add there, Leslie?
Nope, I think that covered it. And people are asking questions in the chat, so I'm fielding those as they come through.
Okay, great. So let's move into talking a little bit about filling the coach position, because we have had a lot of questions and concerns around that. So just going over and kind of reiterating the allowable uses of those funds, the 2C grant funds, the main purpose of them is for math and literacy coaches, paying those salaries, and it should be the minimum number of coaches that you were awarded through TClass. And if you need help making that determination, it would be on your award letter. And feel free to reach out if you see it on your award letter, and still have questions. So allowable uses of funds are those salaries, hiring new staff or coach positions, which might be hiring an external staff, external person to support, or it could be promoting an existing staff member to that full-time coach position. And a side note, any excess funds beyond paying the salaries for 2C could be used to obtain additional coaching and implementation support from the state approved vendor list vendors. A little bit more about allowable uses. If an LEA is in the position that they are not able to hire a coach and have a coach in place, like when the training starts, especially like the summer, or in place to begin that, stepping into that role for the upcoming school year, there's some temporary supports, and it would be approved only for short term. So temporarily, they might contract with the ESC for coach support. And those coaches would also be required to complete all the TEA trainings, but of course we have that waiver process in place. They could contract with coach support from a Decision 2 state approved vendor list vendor. So that state approved vendor list does include numerous technical assistance providers, and they can select the one that best meets their needs. And I know we probably have a lot of questions still around that, so we will make sure, get to those, or, if needed, schedule a meeting to talk with you. I know one thing we really recognize about Decision 2C is how different districts or LEAs can be. One, small rural district might have completely different needs in a different situation when it comes to filling this role. So we are definitely of the mindset that we want to help you find a best fit and really speak with you about your situation. So talking about next steps. So the coaches will self-register if their salary is going to be funded through TClass Decision 2, And the link is here also. After this email, we'll send the link out again. And these are the things that you'll want to make the coaches aware of, because we are going to ask for, of course, their email and phone number, but also we would want to know the percentage of time that they'll spend each day supporting teachers and the estimated number of teachers they'll be supporting. So we also are building out a resource for you where we've had a lot of questions around sample examples of job descriptions. So we have a few of those to share. Also, we'll have some other like really great resources we're building out, and it's not a static thing. It is something that we'd like for you to add to. So for example, if you have a really great job description for your coach role that you've developed, feel free to share that out by emailing it to us and we can add that. So you'll also be getting those links in the follow-up email. And just to hit on a few of our FAQs that we've been receiving around TC. And some of these were, maybe a little bit early on in the process, but still we'll go over them a little bit, just basically over the use of funds. Like we said, the funds have to be used for instructional coaches. It couldn't be an interventionist that works with the students directly. And like at the beginning of the process, there may have been conversations since then where, depending on the situation for this second question, I know one district, if this district was awarded 2 literacy coaches and had a question if they could fund 1 math coach and 1 literacy coach instead of 2 literacy coaches, which you really have to go by your TClass award letter. And if that is a situation where something's changed, then you would need to have a conversation with us so we can make that determination. So you definitely have to go by the number of coaches and math or literacy what you were awarded through TClass, or reach out to us. And same thing with the grade level. So, well, not really the same thing because the coaches are to support grades K-5. So grades K-5, reading or math, and you wouldn't be able to use those funds to support coaches at the middle or high school level. There is some flexibility with the salary. So we've had some questions around that. Looking at your TClass award, you've been awarded that $125,000 annually. So if you wanted to have what you feel is more appropriate for your LEA salary, you could do that, make an adjustment, and perhaps those funds, they would stretch out longer than the 2.5 years for that salary. And as far as the number of coaches, you will need to follow, like we said earlier in the presentation, you need to follow the number of full-time employees that you were awarded in your TClass letter.
Okay, and there's, oh, sorry, do you have one more slide?
Sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
No, you're good. Sorry, I thought that was the last slide. You can finish up these Q&As and
Okay.
I think there's a couple of questions in the chat and then we'll open it up.
Sure. So the coaches have to support those HQIM products. So definitely that's the requirement there. We've had lots of requests for job description examples, so that's going to be provided to you. And then we had a couple questions around just the title of the role. Does it have to be an instructional coach specifically? And that is a local decision. So of course, the main thing is the roles and responsibilities of that role. If you were to change the job title to something other than an instructional coach, that role, that job would still have to fulfill all of the responsibilities that we talked about earlier for the coaching role to meet the requirements of the grant. And we do have lots of time left for your questions. If you'd like to come off mute, you're welcome to, or Leslie may want to go over a few of the questions we've had in the chat or in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm going to start in the chat because we've had some good ones in here. So a question that's come up a couple of times is just getting a lump sum of grant funds and not actually seeing where the coach numbers is. So if you're awarded 1, 2, 3, et cetera, coaches, that is listed in your award letter. When the district was awarded the TClass grant, you should have received a PDF that had a summary of all of the awards that you were awarded through TClass. There was like a big summary table on page 2. And then if you scroll down to the more specific decision points, there was a section for Division 2 specifically. And within that, it had the number of coaches that you were awarded. So I'm happy if you guys can follow up with me via email. I can send award letters out if you don't have access to those at your district. And I'm happy to call out where those are. Unfortunately, I don't have an example I can share, but it is within that award letter. Related to that, there was a question around some people not receiving that full funding for Decision 2C. So when we awarded coaches for smaller districts, we allowed a lower teacher to coach ratio. For larger districts, you had to meet that 1 to 30 teacher to coach ratio. And that's how we awarded the number of coaches based off of the number of teachers you submitted in 2A. So that's how the two are tied. If you are awarded less than 1 coach, that basically means that you can use those funds to offset a salary for a coach or a teacher that's serving in that capacity. Or you can use one of those temporary options if you're not able to hire a full-time coach to work with a state-approved vendor or your ESC to provide that temporary support. But that should go to supporting, 25, 30% of somebody else's salary to serve in that coach capacity to support the 5, 10, or 15 teachers that are implementing the curriculum. So we'll send out, related to that, we'll send out these slides later that have the requirements of the coach. Lane, do you want to flip back to that slide? And there's really 2 parts to this. There's to keep the funding and to continue to receive it through 2024, you need to meet all the requirements of the grant. So that's attending trainings, that's submitting data when it's requested, submitting exit tickets after these trainings, in addition to just meeting what a coach should be doing, right? So that coach should be supporting teachers, implementing Eureka Math or Amplify. And there's this slide which lists that. And then I think the slide before or after that had the general coach requirements. Yeah, so this one. I'm gonna leave this up here for just a second.
And one thing I didn't mention is those LEAs who may be submitting the waivers for the training, who are supported by the state approved vendor list, even though that coach may not be having to do the training, if we find there's overlap, they would still be responsible for submitting the exit tickets for that training, which, ensures that they've received comparable training.
Okay, I'm flipping through other questions here. For specific district questions, I'm going to ask you guys to email me separately, Leanne and I, so we can field those on a more one-off basis if you guys are curious about your specific district award. So I'm going to try and keep it to general questions about the grant here, but I'm happy to follow up afterwards if you guys have more district specifics.
And I'm gonna, we have a slide at the end with our contact information. Well, it has my email, and of course I can pull Leslie in when needed. And we do have those office hours on Tuesdays and Fridays from 8:30 to 9. We're talking about possibly having them on only Tuesdays because we've had a little bit slower traffic lately for the TClass, and it's specific to Decision 2 and 3. So definitely on Tuesdays from 8:30 to 9. So there's the link to register. You can always use the help desk for a little bit more broader questions, but anything that's 2C focused, you can feel free to reach out to me and we can have a conversation around your specific district needs or questions.
And a couple of questions I'm seeing around training dates. We'll be releasing those very soon. They're in the process of getting finalized. Well, we know that you guys need that to plan for summer and for next school year, so we'll get those out as soon as we can. Anything over the summer would likely be entirely asynchronous though, so that coaches can do that over the summer on their own time. A question about splitting coach positions instead of one FTE to 2 part-time. Yes, but I think we may need some more context there for that specifically. You still need to meet, if you're awarded one FTE to support Eureka Math, you still need to have a total of one FTE supporting Eureka Math. If that's split between 2 people, 50% of their time, that's fine, but you need to make sure that that rolls up to equate to whatever the number of coaches you were awarded. Yeah, good question about, is the training for coaches aligned with an implementation partner such as SchoolKit? We will be working really closely with our vendors to run all of this by them beforehand. So we'll have some more details around the waiver process, but essentially what that will look like is we'll release a series of trainings with descriptions, and we're going to ask all of the vendors on that state approved vendor list to do a comparison of the trainings that they're offering. And if you feel like a coach is getting that same training through your approved vendor, you can submit a waiver, and the coach can submit the waiver. So that they don't have to take that training twice. We know that some of those contracts will look varied across the board, so. Yes, coaches are specific to supporting Amplify Texas for K-5 and then Eureka Math Edition. We'll try and get slides out today. We have to upload the video, and that's normally what takes the longest. So we'll try and send a follow-up today or by Monday with slides, recording, and we'll link you to the Google Drive, which has some of the resources and a link to the form that you can start to give out to coaches as they get hired, or if you've already hired coaches, you can send that to them. Office hours are happening. We've had them for about the last 3 months. So you can just kind of pop in on any Tuesday and Friday. We'll communicate out if those dates change. And we go down to 1 day, but for now they're still rocking and rolling. So feel free to join us on Tuesday and Friday mornings.
And we have lots of TEA folks on those calls. So whatever your TCLAS Decision 2 or 3 question is, we even have some TNTP, like Crimsy reps on there as well.
Mm-hmm. And if that time doesn't work for you to jump into those calls, feel free to schedule a separate meeting with us. So we're happy to take more one-off calls. We try and do what we can to answer them during that time, because we're able to bring in a variety of teams to answer any and all questions about Decision 2. But if you need something more one-off, please let us know. And this happened from 8:30 to 9 a.m. Leanne, I don't know if you have this handy, but could you drop the link to the office hours in the chat so they can register? Oh, it's right here. It is handy.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, or we'll definitely have that in the follow-up email where we send the link for the presentation.
If you'd like to schedule an individual meeting, go ahead and reach out to Leanne, and we can set up a time to talk through 2C coach specifics. Okay, I'm going back in the chat a bit. A question around, if you lower the salary, can you extend the grant beyond 23-24, or all funds must be spent by 2024? So the funds do expire in 2024. So they need to be spent by then. Leanne, can you flip back to the slide that has some other options on there?
Yes, and is this pertaining to the question about if they don't use the full salary?
Yes, so it's this, you can choose to lower the salary. Obviously, we know that across Texas, those salary ranges are going to be a very wide variety there. So if you have leftover funds, you can leverage them for things like additional training and so forth. And I think we had a slide on that, if I'm remembering right.
Yes. It's the note at the bottom.
Yeah. But this needs to come after coach is hired and has already been paid. And if there's leftover funds, you can use it for additional training or implementation support. Yep, we'll drop the Zoom link in here in just a second. Give me 1 second, let me grab that link. Link is sent, so you can register for office hours there. It'll just have you pick a date. So feel free to pick a date in there. We are finalizing the total number of hours for PD and training. It will likely be between 30 and 40 for this summer and next school year. Again, if your LEA is in CRMSI for that 2A support, you guys will just be following the CRMSI scope and sequence there. So there's not going to be anything you really need to worry about except making sure that your coaches are attending those sessions. For that state, if you're receiving support from 2A from an approved vendor, then you can look at the training schedule when we post it and do that side-by-side comparison. And again, if you feel like you're getting that exact same training through the contract that you're working with either a region or your approved vendor, then you can submit a waiver for any of the trainings that are apples to apples there.
And I stopped screen sharing so that I could help monitor some of the questions because there's so many. And like Leslie was saying, a lot of them may be more beneficial to have a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I can repeat that. So it'll be probably, it's not quite finalized yet, but we're getting close to that. It'll probably be between 20 and 30 hours of PD and training. Once that gets released, again, those hours are kind of, they'll be consistent across both CRMSI and that state approved vendor list, depending on where you're getting your 2A support. If they're in CRMSI, that coach will just follow the CRMSI scope and sequence that's set within the CRMSI program. And your whole district will be following that if you are approved to be in CRMSI. If you are getting 2A support from the state approved vendor list, when we release that scope and sequence trainings for coaches that are getting funded through 2C, you guys can take a look at it and determine from the contracts that you've signed with your approved vendor or ESC, if they are already getting those trainings through that, they can submit a waiver to not attend the TEA training so that they're not having to do both. If those trainings are different, then they will need to go through all of the trainings and won't be eligible to submit that waiver. Okay, let's see. Per content area, yes. Okay, I see questions slowing up a little bit. If you do not have any more questions, feel free to drop. We will be sending out a follow-up to this meeting that has this recording, the slides. I'll drop in that Google Drive that'll have some additional resources in there that you guys can access as you're hiring on new coaches. Leanne mentioned this as well, but if you feel like you've got some really good onboarding materials, if you're happy to share your job description that you've posted within your district, we're happy to upload anything into our Google Drive for other districts to access. Definitely not a requirement, but if you're willing to share anything that you feel like has worked really well on bringing on new coaches and getting them acquainted with the materials, we'd love to share it out. But outside of that, we'll stay on for a little bit longer if there are questions, so feel free to hang out if you have time. If not, enjoy your Friday and hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll be in touch soon on more specifics of walking through the waiver process and the training schedule, and we'll have some follow-up calls to get more concrete about that. But excited to kick off this grant. I know we haven't gotten this group together since you guys were awarded your TClass award. So.
And just as Leslie was saying, we will share out as soon as we possibly can. I know you're wanting to get the details about the requirements as far as hours of training that are required and the timeline. So, and I will repeat what Leslie said. I think because of the summer training would definitely have an asynchronous option. But as soon as we're able to share that out, we will, and we anticipate it won't be too much longer.
Okay, so feel free to drop if you don't have any other questions. I'm going to keep answering a couple that are flowing in here. Okay, a question about, can we split coach position to part-time instead of one full-time? Yes, that is fine to do, as long as if you were awarded one Eureka Math coach, you need to have, that needs to add up to one Eureka Math coach. So you can split that between two people physically, if that's both 50% of their job, as long as you are meeting up to that one FTE, if that makes sense.
And someone had a question about the links in the presentation. We'll make sure that those links are live when that's shared out with you.
Okay, question from Kelly. With teacher shortages, is there any flexibility with teachers teaching a half day and coaching a half day? The preference there is to have a full-time coach. We know that that's tricky right now. So if that needs to happen, is like they're, this is 50% of their job and they're teaching in the morning and coaching in the afternoon, that's okay. Similar to the other question, that just needs to meet the minimum coach amount that you were awarded. So if you're awarded one FTE and that person is actually only supporting with 50% of their job, then you need to have somebody else also supporting in that capacity.
And
go ahead, Lane.
Oh, I was going to say there's a question, I believe, from an ESC staff, and the ESC staff, it depends on if you're providing implementation support or product support. So if you're providing implementation support, then that wouldn't conflict with the coach's requirements or training that they need. That would be product specific.
Yeah, all the trainings that we offer will be product specific. Okay, a question about if we were awarded two literacy coaches, may we utilize one as a math coach? You do need to stick to what you're awarded. So if you're awarded two literacy coaches, you need to hire two literacy coaches. Going back. Clarissa, I may need to follow up with you one-on-one on yours because I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but we can talk about it more. I'm not sure I understand this question, but I'm going to attempt to field it. If we have received PD from Amplify, will they be entitled to our district's 2C funding? That funding is y'all's and is meant to go towards admin funds to support a coach salary. So no, they wouldn't be.
Yeah, I think maybe it could be a confusion between 2A funding, which is for that type of support that Amplify would provide, and the 2C funding is specifically for the coach salary.
So if you were not awarded a full FTE, so I think an example in the chat is 0.47, that means that based off of the teacher numbers you put in, that you were awarded a coach, but maybe not one that doesn't need to be their full-time role. So that may be a good example of if you have a teacher that can teach a half day and coach a half day, that you can fill that 0.47 about 50% of their time.
I don't know if you addressed this or not, Leslie, but someone asked about a deadline for the coaches to register. And I would say as quickly as they can, but no, they need to register as they're hired on.
Yeah, well, so July is the deadline I'd set for the first big deadline. We will be reaching out individually to districts if you have not registered coaches by July. Mostly just as a check on, where you guys are at and if you feel like you can take advantage of these grant funds. Let's see, if we were awarded 2 part-time coaches, can we just have one coach do both reading and math? Yes, that's fine. If it was like 0.5 math, 0.5 literacy. They will have to go through both trainings, so just be cognizant of that. Oh, I see. Okay. So can we get secondary instructional coaches trained with K-5 coaches? Probably not through the TA hosted trainings. You can leverage the trainings that you're either getting through CRMSI or through the state approved vendor list, vendor support, depending on which grant funds or in-kind funds you received, and train those secondary coaches. We decide we don't pay. Yes, you just need to have the minimum number of coaches that you received on your award. So if those funds take you a bit further and you want to fill 2 coach positions and you were just awarded 1, that is completely fine. Yeah, Kelly, go ahead and email me. I'll look in the PDF and make sure that y'all's is listed there.
And Lynette, did you get your question answered? I think Leslie answered that live. I'm making sure we covered everyone in the Q&A. And then if you maybe had a question early on and you feel like it did not get addressed, if you are free to come off mute and ask if you'd like to, since we have fewer people on here now.
So all of the, Claire, so I'm going to attempt to answer your question, but you can type in the chat if I'm not getting at it. All of the trainings for coaches will, if you receive direct grant funds for 2A, we'll offer the trainings through TEA. If you are getting supports through 2A in kind, you'll be going through CRMSI and getting coach supports there. To be able to use 2C funds for any additional trainings, that's basically just an option if you have leftover funds. So if your district does not use the full 125,000 over the course of the next years, then you can leverage that for additional trainings, but the priority needs to be hiring the minimum number of coaches and then paying that coach's full salary. And a question about if we're using each grant for reading but not Amplify, can we use the funding? So it is tied to implementing Amplify for K-5 specifically. So we may need to chat about that more and figure out what the best solve is for you all. Yes, so the lump sum. So all districts receiving direct grant funds through TClass essentially got a lump sum of grant funds. So we priced out the cost of a coach for the next 2.5 years when we awarded all TClass funds, but you got all those funds up front. So you as a district need to budget over the next 2 years to support your coach through 2024. I do not know if you are able to speak. You can speak through chat and I'll answer it. I'm not sure how this is set up.
It should have been set up where everyone was muted upon entry, but could unmute themselves. I'm trying to go back through and see if there's anything we missed. And it looks like Leslie did a great job of answering those questions kind of as they came through, and looks like most of them have been covered. If you feel free to question back in there if you need to.
Okay, seems like questions are trickling down a bit. So we'll go ahead and end this webinar. If you guys do, feel free to follow up with us. We're really excited that you guys are taking part in this work and are just so excited to see the impact that these coaches have over the next 2 years. So we'll have more information to come and we'll circle back with you guys, but don't hesitate to reach out in the meantime.
Thank you.
Okay, Nancy, I'll answer your question and then we're gonna hop up. Yes, you need to meet the minimum requirements of the coach you were awarded. So if you're awarded 1 FTE to support K-5 literacy, then as long as you've met that, if you have leftover funds, you can use that for training. If you guys would like to go ahead and use that towards another coach, you can do that as well. All right. Well, thank you guys. Have a good Friday and enjoy your weekend. And if you guys are headed off to spring break and are one of the early districts to get there, enjoy your week off. All right. Bye.
Bye.